What happens when a Hollywood legend walks into a late-night studio expecting respect, but ends up being mocked, cornered, and humiliated by the host in front of millions watching live? That night, Jimmy Kimmel thought he could outwit Sylvester Stallone with sarcasm and cheap laughs, but what he got instead was a confrontation so raw, it silenced the entire studio. This wasn't just an interview gone wrong. This was a clash of pride, legacy, and truth. Because this wasn't just another TV interview. This was the night truth hit back. The lights of the studio glowed with that polished warmth only late-night television can create. Jimmy Kimmel sat behind his desk with his signature grin, a smile that looked welcoming to anyone who didn't know better. He leaned toward the camera, voice smooth and confident. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we have a real Hollywood legend, the man who turned mumbling into millions. Please welcome Sylvester Stallone." The audience erupted, clapping on cue as the theme music faded. Stallone walked out from backstage, his steps slow, steady, grounded. He waved once, nodded politely, and took his seat across from Jimmy. The grin on his face was polite but guarded. Jimmy adjusted his tie, still smiling. "Good to see you, Sly," he said. Stallone nodded. "Good to be here." Jimmy didn't waste time before taking his first swing. "You know, I've always admired how you made mumbling a career. I mean, that's talent. Most people need subtitles." The crowd laughed, maybe louder than they should have. Stallone chuckled softly, the kind of laugh that says he heard the joke but didn't find it funny. "Yeah," he said calmly, leaning back a little. "At least I said something worth mumbling." A low ripple ran through the audience. Jimmy's grin tightened for half a second before snapping back into place. "Oh, come on, Sly, you know we love you," Jimmy said, but his tone carried that teasing edge that actors recognize instantly, the kind of flattery that cuts deeper than insults. Stallone didn't respond right away. He just looked at Jimmy, studying him the way a boxer sizes up an opponent. Not for his punches, but for his tells. Jimmy moved on, pretending not to feel the shift in the air. "You've had quite a career," he said, his voice a mix of admiration and mischief. "A stubborn legacy, some might say." He chuckled as if to soften it, but the sarcasm was clear. Stallone gave a faint smile, but his eyes didn't match it. He could tell what was happening. The interview wasn't going to be a celebration of his work. It was going to be a slow roast disguised as small talk. And Jimmy, with a friendly late-night host, was about to see how bad it could go when you tried to roast a man who'd been fighting his whole life. "I guess you could say I'm stubborn," Stallone said. "It's hard not to be when you've had to prove yourself every day for 50 years. Jimmy nodded quickly, feigning sincerity, but his grin never changed. It wasn't kindness, it was calculation. Then came the question that twisted the room tighter. Jimmy leaned in, elbows on the desk, that sly tone sliding back into his voice. "So tell me, Sly, another muscle movie? Or did you finally decide to use words this time?" The crowd laughed again, but it sounded nervous now, unsure of whose side they were supposed to be on. Stallone looked straight at Jimmy, no smile, no blink. "It's about redemption," he said slowly, "not flexing." Jimmy tilted his head. "Redemption, huh? Must be on sale in Hollywood." The laughter was forced this time, weaker. Stallone didn't even flinch. He just looked at Jimmy like he was staring down an opponent who didn't realize he'd already lost the round. The energy in the room shifted. No more playful banter, no more easy rhythm. Jimmy leaned back in his chair, still holding that grin like it was part of his job description. "So, Sly," he said, his tone playful but sharp, "you bring your protein shake tonight, or do you keep that in the dressing room next to the dumbbells?" The audience laughed, though this time it felt forced. Like everyone knew it wasn't really funny, but laughed anyway because they were supposed to. Stallone smiled politely, waited for the noise to die down, then answered in a low, steady voice. "Left it backstage," he said. "Didn't want to outshine your kale juice." A few genuine laughs broke through, quick and nervous. Jimmy's grin flickered for the first time, just slightly, like a man who wasn't used to being hit back. He leaned forward again, feigning amusement, but his knuckles tightened around the cue cards on the desk. Trying to recover, Jimmy gave a loud, exaggerated laugh. "Hey, just having fun, man. It's all jokes." His tone was lighter now, but there was something in his eyes, the first flicker of irritation. Stallone didn't look away. "Yeah," he said evenly. "Sometimes fun means punching down, just to look tall." The words landed like a quiet right hook. The laughter that followed wasn't laughter at all, more like a room collectively holding its breath. Jimmy glanced at the producer off stage, pretending to read his notes, but everyone could see it. The moment when a man who usually controlled the tempo of the room suddenly realized someone else was calling the rhythm. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Stallone leaned back, arms crossed, calm but alert, like a fighter waiting for the next punch. Jimmy forced a chuckle, the kind that says I'm still in charge, even when he wasn't. "Guess we've got a tough crowd tonight," he muttered, trying to spin the tension into humor. Stallone's expression didn't change. "Tough crowd?" he repeated. "No, just people who can tell the difference between a joke and a jab." The line hit clean. Jimmy's smile froze in place, and for a heartbeat the mask slipped. It was no longer host and guest. It was a showman staring at a fighter, both of them realizing this wasn't going to be friendly. Jimmy shuffled his cards, pretending to glance at his notes, but everyone could tell he was looking for control. He forced a casual tone. "You know, Sly, I heard you wrote Rocky in just 3 days. What happened? You run out of crayons?" The audience laughed. Too loud, too automatic. The kind of laughter that fills awkward space rather than earns it. Stallone didn't flinch. He leaned forward just slightly, his elbows on his knees, voice quiet but sharp enough to slice through the fake cheer. "I wrote it," he said slowly, "while sleeping in a bus terminal and trying to sell my dog so I could eat. So yeah, crayons weren't exactly the priority." The laughter stopped. Instantly. The sound that filled the room wasn't applause or shock. It was silence, deep and uncomfortable. Jimmy froze, his grin fading a fraction before he caught himself. "Wow, okay, that's, dark," he muttered, trying to force another smile, but it didn't land. Stallone didn't blink. "You asked," he said, tone steady but cutting. "Sometimes you crack jokes, Jimmy, and sometimes you crack dignity. You should be careful which one you're breaking tonight." The words hung in the air like smoke. The audience didn't move. Even Jimmy's usual bounce was gone. For a moment he just stared, not at his notes, not at the crowd, but at Stallone, trying to read if this was still banter or if he had just gone too far. Jimmy gave a tight laugh, the kind that doesn't reach his eyes. "Hey, come on, Sly, I'm just joking." "It's late night. That's what we do." Stallone leaned back, expression calm but his jaw tight. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That's what people always say when they're hiding behind the joke." The audience murmured softly, an uneasy sound, half sympathy, half disbelief. The host shifted in his seat, adjusting his tie as if trying to reset the balance of power. But it was too late. The air in the studio felt different now, heavier, raw, like the start of a storm. The easy rhythm of laughter and applause was gone, replaced by a thick, pulsing silence. Jimmy's amusement turned into defense. Stallone's patience turned into control. For years, Kimmel had been the one pulling the strings, deciding when a guest looked funny or foolish. But now, for the first time, it wasn't his show anymore. It was a ring. And across from him sat a man who'd spent his life fighting to be taken seriously. And he was just getting started. Jimmy shifted in his chair, that smirk still plastered on his face. But the shine had started to fade. He could feel the room changing. The laughter had turned thin, brittle. Still, he pushed forward, unwilling to lose his grip on the audience. "You've made more sequels than Hollywood has ideas," he said, pretending to read off his cue card. "I mean, at this point, do you just hit copy and paste on the script? Rocky 9, Rambo 12, the comeback of the comeback?" The crowd gave a half-hearted laugh, but it wasn't the laugh Jimmy was used to. It wasn't that collective roar that told him he was still in control. It was the kind that came from people watching something slowly cross a line. Stallone looked at him, really looked at him, the way only a man who's been underestimated his entire life can. "You know, Jimmy," he said slowly, "I've made a lot of movies, sure, but at least mine still inspire people." He paused, his voice lowering just enough to make the silence feel personal. Yours? He leaned forward slightly. They expire. The studio gasped. You could hear it. That small, sharp intake of breath before everything else just stopped. Jimmy blinked, his smirk faltering. For the first time, he wasn't sure if the cameras were his allies or witnesses. He tried to recover, tapping his pen on the desk. Okay, he said, forcing a laugh. I walked into that one. His smile didn't reach his eyes. He leaned forward again, this time with a glint of irritation. But come on, Sly. You don't honestly think people still take those movies seriously, right? You've become kind of a punchline, a nostalgia trip for the gym crowd. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. They could feel it. That word punchline landed wrong. Stallone let it hang in the air for a beat too long before responding. You know, he said, calm but cutting, people become punchlines when they let someone else write the jokes. Only when hosts like you try to turn meaning into mockery. His tone wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the kind of voice that made people stop pretending. Jimmy forced a laugh that sounded more like a cough. It's a comedy show, man, lighten up. Stallone leaned back, his voice still even. You hide behind that word, comedy, like it's armor. But there's a difference between being funny and being small. The audience broke into applause, loud and genuine this time. It wasn't the polite, trained clapping of a TV audience. It was real, like something in Stallone's words had hit home. Jimmy froze, that applause cutting straight through him. He looked at one camera, then another, trying to find a place to redirect the energy, but there was nowhere to go. His set, his show, his rules, all of it suddenly belonged to the man sitting across from him. Stallone didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice or smile. He just spoke, slow and clear, the kind of voice that made even the back row lean in. You know, Jimmy, Rocky wasn't just a film. It wasn't about muscles or fights or fame. It was about hope. It was about the kind of people who get laughed at for dreaming, the ones who keep swinging when the world tells them they're done. He looked at Jimmy directly now. You turn that into a punchline, and maybe the joke's not on me anymore. The studio fell silent. The cameras were still rolling, but nobody moved. Even Jimmy's trademark grin, that mask he'd worn through every awkward moment in his career, was gone. He looked unsure, his usual confidence drained. For once, it wasn't Stallone who looked like the relic. It was Jimmy, the man who mocked everything he didn't understand. For the first time that night, he didn't know which camera to face because no angle could save him from what had just happened. The audience wasn't laughing anymore. They were watching something they didn't expect to see on late-night television. A man standing his ground, not with anger, but with truth. And in that moment, Sylvester Stallone didn't just win a war of words. He reminded everyone in the room what respect sounded like when it finally spoke for itself. Jimmy took a breath, forced another smile, and tried to claw back some control. The crowd's reaction from the last exchange had thrown him off, but he wasn't ready to back down. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, voice carrying a sharper edge now. You know, Sly, it's kind of funny hearing you talk about struggle, he said. You're a millionaire. You've got mansions, cars, trophies, preaching about pain from the comfort of a private jet. It's a little rich, don't you think? The crowd gave a weak laugh, more out of habit than humor. Stallone didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on Jimmy and his tone came out steady. Quiet, but so direct it almost cut through the applause light. Struggle doesn't expire with a paycheck, he said. You don't stop bleeding just because you bought new gloves. The words hit harder than anyone expected. Jimmy shifted, chuckling awkwardly. Okay, no need to get dramatic, he said, looking for the next question on his cards but not really reading it. Stallone leaned forward now, elbows on his knees, that stillness replaced by something heavier. You think struggle's about money, he said. That's your problem. You've never had to fight for respect. You just woke up one day and found a camera pointing at you. The crowd murmured again, low and uneasy. Jimmy blinked, not used to being the one on defense. Hey, don't get philosophical on me, he said, laughing nervously. Stallone didn't miss a beat. Don't get cheap on me, he shot back. The reaction was instant. That kind of raw, surprised energy that fills a room when someone says exactly what everyone else was thinking, but didn't dare to. Jimmy's face tightened. He tapped his pen against the desk, trying to hide the tension creeping up his neck. "You know what this is really about?" he said finally, his voice lower, his humor gone. "You're scared of fading. Scared people won't care anymore. That's why you keep coming back. Sequels, reboots, speeches about dignity. You're chasing relevance. It was supposed to sting, to get him back on top. But Stallone didn't flinch. He leaned back, calm as ever, and looked Jimmy dead in the eye. "No," he said slowly. "You're scared I haven't." That line hit like a knockout punch. Jimmy blinked once, twice, his mouth half open, but with no words coming out. The audience reacted in that half-second delay. A few gasps, a few quiet cheers, and then silence again. Stallone didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He just sat there, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. Jimmy looked down at his cue cards, then back at the cameras. But for the first time that night, they didn't feel like allies. They felt like mirrors, and every mirror showed the same thing. The man who made a career mocking legends was suddenly sitting across from one who refused to be laughed at. When the show returned from commercial, Jimmy forced a bigger smile than before. He sat taller, louder, like a man pretending the last 10 minutes hadn't gone sideways. "Welcome back," he said, clapping his hands once. "We're here with the one and only Sylvester Stallone, the living action figure himself." He turned toward the camera with mock enthusiasm, expecting the crowd to laugh. A few people did, but it was hesitant, uneven. Stallone didn't blink. He looked at Jimmy and said quietly, "Better to be carved in stone than molded in plastic." The room erupted. The applause wasn't polite this time. It was loud, honest, and just a little dangerous. You could see Jimmy's jaw tighten behind his grin. Trying to shake it off, Jimmy leaned forward, pretending to joke his way through. "You know, your fans still think you're that Philly underdog," he said. "The fighter who never quits, the guy who keeps getting back up. But come on, Sly, you've been doing this for decades. Don't you think it's time to pass the torch? Maybe hang up the gloves?" Stallone sat back, his expression calm but his eyes sharp. "I am that underdog," he said simply. "I just wear better shoes now." The crowd laughed, but it was laughter with weight behind it, the kind that sided with him, not the host. Jimmy's smirk faded slightly. He pushed again, a little harder this time. "I mean, seriously, isn't there a point where even a legend needs to stop fighting?" Stallone's reply came slow and cold, like someone choosing every word on purpose. "Would you tell a soldier to hang up his boots because the war makes you uncomfortable?" The room went dead silent. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. Jimmy opened his mouth but said nothing. The question wasn't rhetorical. It was a line in the sand. For a few seconds, the two men just stared at each other, one trying to laugh his way out of a corner, the other refusing to let him. That silence thickened, stretching longer than television usually allows. You could feel it through the screen, the shift from performance to something real. This wasn't an interview anymore. It wasn't promotion or PR or playful banter for ratings. It had turned into an interrogation, not of careers but of values. Stallone wasn't just defending himself now. He was standing up for something bigger, for everyone who'd ever been laughed at for refusing to quit. And in that moment, the man who built his legend by getting back up was doing it again, this time under studio lights instead of in a boxing ring. And Jimmy? He finally looked like he knew he'd picked the wrong fight. Jimmy straightened in his seat, trying to gather whatever authority he had left. The last few exchanges had thrown him off balance, and it showed. His tone, once playful, now carried the sharpness of someone who felt cornered. "You know," he said, pretending to be casual, "people talk, Sly. They say a lot of your success wasn't really yours. That ghostwriters, directors, editors, they're the ones who built your legacy. You were just the face of it." The crowd gave a low murmur, that uneasy mix of curiosity and discomfort. Jimmy smiled, thinking he'd found his angle again. But Stallone didn't move. He didn't frown, didn't blink, didn't even shift in his chair. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, calm in a way that made it scarier. People say a lot of things, he said. Then he leaned forward slightly. People also say talk show hosts fake their laughs. The line hit like a glass shattering on tile. Jimmy froze. The crowd gasped. A quick collective inhale that made the air feel thinner. Stallone didn't look away. Only one of those rumor, he said, pausing just long enough. Hurts less when it's true. The reaction was immediate. A few people clapped. Others just sat still, eyes wide, unsure if they were supposed to cheer or stay silent. Jimmy's grin had vanished completely now. He looked down at his cue cards, but it was pointless. There was no card for this moment. Trying to recover, he forced a laugh that sounded like it scraped his throat. You think this chair was handed to me? He asked, defensive now. You think I didn't earn this? Stallone leaned back, still calm, his tone deliberate. I think comfort hands people a mic and calls it merit. The audience murmured again, low, electric, like a wave moving through the room. Jimmy's eyes flicked toward the camera, then back to Stallone. For once, he wasn't sure which side of the lens he was standing on. The one in control, or the one being exposed. Stallone didn't give him a chance to shift the tone. He leaned forward, his voice lower, cutting through the silence. I fought to earn my voice, he said. You inherited yours. Jimmy's face went red. His eyes narrowed, that host persona falling apart piece by piece. Say that again, he snapped, trying to sound in control but only managing to sound angry. Stallone didn't flinch. You heard me, he said softly. For once. The studio was silent. You could feel the tension rippling between them. A clash of worlds, one built on years of struggle, the other on the comfort of spotlight. Jimmy's show had always been a stage where he got the last laugh, but tonight the mask was slipping. The audience wasn't looking at a confident host anymore. They were watching a man unravel under the weight of his own act, and across from him, Stallone didn't look like a guest. He looked like judgment itself, calm, unshaken, and terrifyingly real. Jimmy's tone shifted again, this time coated with fake humor and quiet irritation. He leaned back in his chair, trying to reclaim some sense of control, his grin just a little too wide. So tell me, Sly, he said, tapping his cue card against the desk. What's next? Rocky. Retirement home? Or maybe a cologne? Ode to ego. One spray and you instantly believe you're still relevant. A few nervous laughs fluttered from the audience, thin and awkward. Stallone didn't move. He didn't blink. He just stared across the desk, his voice calm but razor sharp when it came. Keep talking, Jimmy. Every punchline's a confession. Jimmy's grin faltered. Hey, relax, he said quickly, trying to sound light again. It's just TV, man. You know how this works. Stallone tilted his head slightly, his tone steady but cutting deeper than any insult. That's the problem, he said. You treat meaning like filler between ads. The room went quiet. You could feel the air getting heavy, the kind of silence that warns something irreversible is about to happen. Jimmy blinked, confused for a split second, like he couldn't tell if Stallone was serious. But he was. Dead serious. Jimmy tried to recover, leaning forward, smiling too hard again. Come on, Sly, don't get dramatic, he said, forcing a laugh that didn't sound like him anymore. But Stallone didn't even look at him. Slowly, deliberately, he pushed back his chair and stood up. The sound of it echoed through the studio louder than the applause ever had. What are you doing? Jimmy asked, his voice breaking slightly between confusion and panic. Where are you going? Stallone looked down at him, calm, collected, unmoved. You asked if I could take a joke, he said quietly. Can you take the truth? The words hit like a gunshot in slow motion. The audience froze. Even the cameras seemed to hold still. It wasn't yelling. It wasn't anger. It was something colder, more powerful. It was finality. Jimmy laughed nervously, eyes darting to the camera crew for backup that wasn't coming. Oh, come on, you're not walking out, are you? He said, still trying to turn the moment into a punchline. But Stallone wasn't laughing. He stood there still as a statue. You mock what you don't understand, he said, And you hide behind laughter so you don't have to listen. He paused, letting the silence stretch until it almost hurt. I don't need applause to prove I'm real. Then he turned. Every motion was slow, deliberate, not angry, just absolute. His steps carried the kind of weight that came from years of fighting battles no one saw. The audience watched in stunned silence as he walked away from the desk, away from the cameras, away from the noise. Jimmy opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The host, the man who always had a comeback, had finally run out of words. And Stallone, he didn't need any more. The walk itself said everything. For a moment, the studio stayed frozen. No laughter, no applause, no sound. Just the faint hum of cameras recording something no one knew how to frame. Jimmy sat stiff behind his desk, his eyes darting toward the audience. Then the producers, then back to Stallone, who was already halfway to the edge of the stage. The silence felt unbearable, so Jimmy did what he always did when things went wrong. He reached for a joke, for control, for a lifeline. He forced a grin, though his voice cracked slightly when he spoke. Next week, he said loudly, his tone forced and shaky, we'll have someone with a sense of humor. It was supposed to win back the crowd, but it didn't. The words hung in the air like cheap perfume, loud, artificial, and quickly fading. Stallone stopped walking, still facing away, then turned his head just enough for his voice to carry. Try someone with a soul. The line dropped like a hammer. The audience gasped, and a few even clapped instinctively, not out of malice toward Jimmy, but because they knew they'd just heard something brutally honest. Jimmy's grin died instantly. The cameras stayed trained on him, but he looked small now, trapped behind the desk he once ruled like a throne. Hey, Jimmy called out, desperate now, his voice rising as Stallone kept walking. You can't just walk out. We're not done. The panic in his voice was unmistakable. A man realizing the show had slipped completely out of his hands. Stallone didn't even pause. He kept moving toward the curtain, his shoulders square, his pace deliberate. Watch me, he said, not turning around. The audience stayed silent. No laughter, no cue lights, just the sound of his footsteps echoing across the stage. Heavy, final, unforgettable. At the edge of the stage, Stallone stopped. He turned just enough to look back. Not at Jimmy, not at the crowd, but at the space itself. The cameras caught his face one last time, calm and resolute. I spent a lifetime building characters who fight for something, he said, his voice low but steady. Maybe late night should try that once. It wasn't anger anymore. It was truth. Quiet, heavy, impossible to argue with. Then he walked off. No mic drop, no theatrics. Just a man leaving behind a stage that no longer deserved him. The silence that followed was the kind that doesn't fade quickly. Jimmy looked around, lost, his usual rhythm gone. The cameras were still rolling, but the show was over, and everyone in the room knew it. Stallone hadn't just walked out of an interview. He'd walked out of the act, and for the first time, the laughter machine of late-night television ran out of fuel, leaving nothing but the echo of dignity in its place. The studio lights stayed on, but the energy was gone. No outro music, no applause, no attempt to smooth things over. Just silence, thick and lingering, like the aftertaste of truth. Jimmy sat there motionless, hands folded on his desk, eyes fixed on the empty space where Stallone had been. The chair across from him looked heavier now, as if it carried the weight of something he couldn't understand. The cameras were still rolling, but no one knew whether to cut or keep filming. Without Stallone, without the laughter, the set suddenly felt hollow. The man who made his living controlling the room now sat in it, smaller than ever. For a long moment, Jimmy didn't say anything. He stared at his notes, at the cue cards scattered on his desk, at the camera's red light blinking like an accusation. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said to no one in particular, he couldn't take a joke. It was weak, defensive. A line thrown into the air not to be heard, but to fill the silence. The narration that followed wasn't spoken aloud, but it might as well have been. No, he just refused to be one. Some truths don't need applause to land. They just stay, in the air, in the walls, in the uncomfortable stillness that follows when a man says what no one else dares to. Stallone didn't storm out. He didn't slam doors or shout. He walked out quietly, deliberately, like someone who knew exactly what he was taking with him and what he was leaving behind. What he left wasn't anger or spectacle. It was something heavier, the ghost of every artist who'd ever been mocked for caring too much, for feeling too deeply, for believing that meaning still mattered. Every person who'd ever been laughed at for taking their craft, their struggle, their hope seriously. He carried their weight with him as he walked off that stage. And when the curtain fell, it wasn't rebellion. It was reclamation. The lights dimmed, the cameras cut, and the studio returned to its empty stillness. But the echo stayed, not the echo of laughter or applause or performance. It was quieter than that, deeper. It was the sound of a man walking away not in defeat, but in dignity. And that silence, that perfect, undeniable silence, said more than any closing monologue ever could. What started as a harmless late-night interview turned into a televised showdown that stripped away the jokes and left only truth. Stallone didn't storm out in anger. He walked out in dignity, proving that real strength isn't loud, it's earned. Whose side are you on? The host who hid behind humor, or the fighter who refused to be one? Tell us what you think in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that reveal what really happens when the masks come off.